My name is Steve, and I recently experienced a devastating revelation about my marriage. I was on a late flight from France to New York, exhausted from the 9-hour journey that began at 5 p.m. The flight was made even more challenging by a spoiled, loud 5-year-old child sitting next to me with his inattentive parents. By the time I arrived at my apartment, it was already 2:30 in the morning. As I entered our home, I noticed a light on in the living room and wondered if my wife, Sarah, was still awake. She had mentioned earlier that she was tired and planned to go to bed as soon as she got home. Our apartment was a spacious, open-concept space with the kitchen and living room connected and the bedroom enclosed by a curtain wall. I quietly hung up my jacket, grabbed my bag, and entered the bedroom, only to find Sarah naked and filming herself on her phone. Shocked, I asked her what she was doing. She jumped up, startled by my presence, and explained that her psychologist had suggested taking pictures for me to help with our drifting relationship. To provide some context, Sarah was an interesting person when we first met. She valued cleanliness and was a fair and decent member of the community, traits instilled by her mother, Rebecca. However, Sarah was also very frank and principled in our relationship. She could comfortably walk around the house naked or eat in a crouched position at the dinner table. But once in public, she would transform into a proper lady. Despite this, she never allowed herself to descend to the level of women who would photograph themselves naked or expose their bodies for attention or social media. Surprised by her actions, I asked to see her phone to ensure she hadn't sent the pictures to anyone. She hesitated briefly before handing it over, and I found no evidence of her sending the images. Sarah apologized, claiming she meant well, and I forgave her before going to bed, unaware of the deception that had just taken place. The following morning, I had nearly forgotten about the incident, exhausted from the previous night's events. Sarah apologized again, and we enjoyed a quiet breakfast together, discussing potential plans for my 2-week rest period before returning to Europe. Unfortunately, Sarah disappointed me by revealing that she would be unable to take time off due to her heavy workload. The first week of my break was uneventful, filled with reading, watching movies, and occasional beers with friends while Sarah was at work. One evening, I stepped out onto our balcony, which overlooked the entrance of our building, to enjoy a glass of beer and the New York night. As I observed the people coming and going, I spotted Sarah exiting a car that appeared to be a BMW M5 F90. She was wearing a black dress and the leather jacket I had given her. Instead of entering the building, she walked towards the entrance and disappeared behind the corner of the house. When Sarah finally arrived at our apartment, I casually inquired about her day and mentioned seeing her exit a car. She brushed it off, claiming a friend had given her a ride. However, I began to doubt her answer, as the car seemed an unlikely choice for a mere friend. From that moment on, my suspicions started to grow as I noticed changes in Sarah's behavior and appearance. Sarah, who once avoided revealing clothes, began dressing differently for work, opting for a black dress with an open neckline and stockings instead of her usual black pants and shirt. The differences between the old Sarah and the current one were becoming increasingly apparent, and I couldn't help but feel shocked by her transformation. The final straw came when Sarah returned home one night, reeking of another man's scent. She had mentioned attending a girls' party at a friend's house 4 blocks away after her shift ended at 8 p.m. During her call, I was driving my friend Mike home from the bar, making it difficult for me to fully process her words. I attempted to call her back throughout the evening, eager to have a serious conversation upon her return. When Sarah finally arrived home, I confronted her about not answering my calls. She claimed her phone had died, making excuses like a child who thought I was too stupid to see through her lies or too drunk to think straight. Frustrated, I demanded an explanation for her recent behavior, pointing out how much she had changed from the responsible and decent person I'd always known. Instead of providing a reasonable answer, Sarah resorted to insults, calling me an asshole and a jerk before storming out of the apartment. I sat up all night, trying to process what had happened, and realizing that there could be no other reason for her behavior than the influence of another person. It was then that I noticed Sarah's phone, which she had left on the dresser in the hallway. Determined to uncover the truth about her infidelity, I picked up the phone and entered our anniversary date as the password, which, ironically, granted me access. I immediately began scrolling through her chats with friends, quickly discovering their group conversation. Among the mostly female participants, I noticed an account belonging to someone named Andrew. Clicking on his name, I was prompted to view their archived messages. As I delved into their correspondence, everything started to fall into place. The pictures, videos, and messages revealed the extent of Sarah's affair, with the first date coinciding with the time I had left for my business trip. Devastated by the betrayal and loss of trust, I called Mike, who had sobered up by then. After listening to me pour out my heart, he agreed to meet for another drink. Now, as I reflect on the situation, I find myself contemplating the next steps. The most certain option seems to be filing for divorce, as I haven't heard from Sarah in 4 days, with her last communication being a tweet labeling me as a jerk of a husband. As I navigate this unfamiliar and traumatic territory, I would greatly appreciate hearing from others who have experienced similar situations and learning how they handled them. This is my first time dealing with such a betrayal, and the emotional toll has been immense. To provide more context about Sarah's work, she was employed as a designer at a large firm that sold dresses. Her job was demanding, often requiring her to work late hours. In the past, I had always admired her dedication and strong work ethic, but now I couldn't help but question whether her long hours were entirely work-related. The changes in Sarah's behavior had been gradual, making them easier to overlook at first. However, looking back, I could see the progression clearly. Her newfound preference for revealing clothing, her secretive phone habits, and her increasingly distant attitude towards me all pointed to a shift in her priorities and loyalties. I found myself replaying our recent interactions in my head, searching for clues I might have missed. The night she came home smelling of another man's cologne stood out as a particularly painful memory. How could I have been so blind to the signs? The thought of her betrayal made my stomach churn and my heart ache. As I sat in Mike's apartment, nursing a drink and pouring out my sorrows, I couldn't help but feel a sense of failure. I had always prided myself on being a good husband, attentive and supportive of Sarah's needs and aspirations. Now I wondered if I had fallen short somehow, if there was something I could have done differently to prevent this from happening. Mike listened patiently, offering words of support and encouragement. He reminded me that Sarah's actions were not a reflection of my worth as a person or as a husband. It was a small comfort, but I appreciated his friendship more than ever in that moment. As the night wore on and the alcohol blurred the edges of my pain, I found myself thinking about the future. The idea of divorce was daunting, but I knew I couldn't continue living a lie. I deserved better than a partner who would betray my trust and disrespect our marriage so blatantly. I resolved to take things one day at a time, to focus on healing myself emotionally and building a new life without Sarah. It wouldn't be easy, but I knew I had the strength to get through this. With the support of friends like Mike and the hope of brighter days ahead, I would find a way to move forward. As I drifted off to sleep that night, my mind was still reeling from the revelations of the past few days. But amidst the pain and confusion, there was also a glimmer of relief. The truth, however ugly, was finally out in the open. And with that knowledge, I could begin the process of picking up the pieces and rebuilding my life on a foundation of honesty and self-respect. The next morning, I woke up with a pounding headache and a heavy heart. The events of the previous night came rushing back, and the reality of my situation hit me like a ton of bricks. I was a man betrayed, my trust shattered by the one person I had believed would always be by my side. I stumbled into Mike's kitchen, grateful for the strong cup of coffee he handed me. We sat in silence for a while, each lost in our own thoughts. Finally, Mike broke the silence, asking me what I planned to do next. I sighed, running a hand through my disheveled hair. "I guess I need to confront Sarah," I said, my voice sounding hollow even to my own ears. "I need to hear her side of the story, even though I'm not sure I can believe anything she says at this point." Mike nodded, his expression sympathetic. "Just remember, you don't owe her anything," he said. "She's the one who messed up, not you." I knew he was right, but the thought of facing Sarah filled me with dread. I couldn't imagine how I would react, seeing her again after learning the truth about her betrayal. I spent the rest of the day trying to distract myself, but my mind kept wandering back to Sarah and Andrew. I couldn't help but wonder how long the affair had been going on, how many times she had lied to me about her whereabouts, or the nature of their relationship. As evening approached, I steeled myself for the confrontation that lay ahead. I knew I couldn't put it off any longer. I needed answers, even if they were painful to hear. When I arrived at our apartment, I found Sarah sitting on the couch, her eyes red and puffy from crying. She looked up at me as I entered, her expression a mix of guilt and apprehension. "Steve, she began, but I held up a hand to stop her. "I know about Andrew," I said, my voice calm despite the turmoil raging inside me. "I saw the messages on your phone." Sarah's face crumpled, and she buried her head in her hands. "I'm so sorry," she sobbed. "It was a mistake. I never meant to hurt you." I felt a flicker of anger at her words. "A mistake?" I repeated incredulously. "You've been carrying on an affair for weeks, maybe even months. That's not a mistake, Sarah. That's a choice." She looked up at me, her eyes pleading. I know, she said. "I got caught up in something I couldn't control. Andrew, he made me feel things I hadn't felt in a long time." I shook my head, unable to believe what I was hearing. "So you're saying it's my fault?" I asked, my voice rising. "That I wasn't enough for you, so you had to go find someone else?" "No, that's not what I meant," Sarah said quickly. "It's not your fault, Steve, it's mine. I take full responsibility for what I did." I laughed bitterly. "Well, that's something at least," I said. "But it doesn't change the fact that you betrayed me, Sarah. You broke our marriage vows, and you shattered my trust in you." Sarah was silent for a long moment, her shoulders shaking with sobs. Finally, she looked up at me, her eyes red and swollen. "What do you want me to do?" she asked quietly. I sighed, suddenly feeling very tired. "I don't know," I admitted. "I need some time to think, to process all of this. But I do know one thing, Sarah. I can't stay here, not after what you've done." She nodded, her expression resigned. "I understand," she said. "I'll go stay with my mother for a while, give you some space." I watched as she gathered a few belongings and headed for the door. Just before she left, she turned back to me, her eyes filled with tears. "I'm sorry, Steve," she whispered. "I never wanted to hurt you." And with that, she was gone, leaving me alone in the apartment that had once been our home. In the days that followed, I struggled to come to terms with the new reality of my life. The apartment felt empty and cold without Sarah's presence, and I found myself haunted by memories of happier times. I threw myself into work, trying to distract myself from the pain of her betrayal. But even there, I couldn't escape the reminders of what I had lost. Colleagues would ask about Sarah, and I would have to force a smile and make up some excuse for her absence. At night, I lay awake, my mind spinning with questions and doubts. Had there been signs I had missed, clues that could have warned me of what was to come? Had I been too trusting, too naive in believing that Sarah would never hurt me like this? I met with a divorce lawyer, trying to wrap my head around the legal implications of ending our marriage. The thought of dividing our assets, of separating our lives after so many years together, was almost too much to bear. But even in my darkest moments, I knew I couldn't go back to the way things were. Sarah's betrayal had shattered something inside me, and I knew I would never be able to look at her the same way again. As the weeks passed, I started to find small moments of peace amidst the chaos. I reconnected with old friends, some of whom had gone through similar experiences and could offer words of wisdom and support. I started seeing a therapist, working through the complex emotions that Sarah's affair had triggered. It wasn't easy, confronting the pain and anger and fear that had taken root inside me. But slowly, I started to feel like I was making progress, like I was beginning to heal. One day, about a month after Sarah had left, I received a package in the mail. Inside was a letter from her, along with a small box containing her wedding ring. With shaking hands, I unfolded the letter and began to read. "Dear Steve," it began, "I know there are no words that can make up for what I did to you, the pain I caused, the trust I betrayed. It's something I will regret for the rest of my life. But I want you to know that I never stopped loving you. Even in the midst of my mistake, even as I let myself get caught up in something I knew was wrong, I never stopped caring for you. I know that doesn't change anything. I know I can't take back what I did, or undo the hurt I caused, but I wanted you to know that, for what it's worth. I'm working on myself now, trying to understand why I made the choices I did. I'm seeing a therapist, and I'm learning a lot about myself and the issues I need to address. I don't expect forgiveness from you, Steve. I know I don't deserve it, but I do hope that someday you can find happiness again. You deserve so much better than what I gave you. I'm sorry from the bottom of my heart. I wish you all the best in the future. Sincerely, Sarah. I read the letter over and over again, trying to make sense of the emotions it stirred up inside me. A part of me wanted to tear it to shreds, to reject Sarah's words and the apology they contained. But another part of me recognized the sincerity in her words, the genuine remorse and regret that poured out of every line. I knew I wasn't ready to forgive her, not yet. The wounds were still too raw, the betrayal too fresh in my mind. But for the first time since that awful night, I felt a glimmer of hope for the future. I knew I had a long road ahead of me, a journey of healing and self-discovery that would be filled with ups and downs. But I also knew I was strong enough to face whatever lay ahead. And so, with a deep breath and a renewed sense of purpose, I tucked Sarah's letter away and turned my face towards the future, ready to embrace whatever it might bring.